Okay, the Red Scare. Hopefully the volume is up a little bit more on this. I didn't realize that there was a whole separate, or that there was a dial on my fancy Yeti mic for the volume. So, this is kind of a really neat thing, well, depressing, but a lot of, we think after September 11th, there was this huge fear of terrorism in the United States and of Muslims, and really what preceded that 100 years before, 90 years before, was this idea of the Red Scare with communists or anarchists, people wanting to overthrow the government coming in from Europe. This idea of the Statue of Liberty, which is famous for saying, "Come unto me, ye oppressed," and then and that liberty, that invitation to the U.S. being threatened by these European anarchists who are known as the Reds, basically because of what happened in the Soviet Union in 1917, or in Russia at that time. Russia, in 1917, in the midst of this mess that they are in World War I, they started out as one of the original forces, but their war efforts totally collapses. And when that occurs, and Russia drops out of the war, sort of surrenders to Germany, there is revolution. Russia becomes, in the early 1920s, the first communist country and becomes the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, or communism, is associated with the color red. So what happens is Russia, the guy who comes in and leads this revolution, this communist revolution, is a guy named Vladimir Lenin. Lenin and the communists are associated with the color red, so Russia falls into this bloody civil war with the Reds versus the Whites. The United States was one of the countries giving money to the Whites, the people fighting against this communist revolution. So the Reds, the communists, also known as the Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik Revolution, that happens there. So there is legitimate concern over in the United States that there could be an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government, and that has people freaked out. One of the things, I don't think your book mentions it, but there's this group called Comintern. You can see this idea of communists and international. It's a group whose goals were to overthrow the governments, to see all the red, the communism, in different places, and so they were actually out as one of their goals to create communist countries, overthrow the forces. You can see Paris back there. You've got the London Bridge. I think that's Chartres. You've got this Hagia Sophia, which is in Istanbul. The pyramids over there. So all of these international places where they really want to overthrow the existing system. So there is a legitimate concern. And then, like it talks about in the book, there are all these freaky mail bombs that go out in the mail against wealthy people, against politicians. The Palmer ones were big because since he was the Attorney General, he is really going to clamp down with laws against those people, and because there have been legitimate concerns about communists and their actions, or anarchists, people still wanting to overthrow the government, that leads to a lot of prejudice against them. The Sacco and Vanzetti case is mentioned, whether these guys got a fair trial or not, because they were immigrants from Italy who were anarchists and ultimately executed. So, we were in this pro-push after World War I for democracy in all places, but there were these concerns because you had this new communism that calls for, in order, according to Karl Marx, for a communism to take root, there has to be an actual overthrow of the system. So there were these concerns about the Reds. Where was communism? This is going to happen again when we get into World War II. But one of these things, similar to after September 11th, a lot of paranoia and prejudice with an understanding of, oh my gosh, look what has happened. And there really were these mail bombings and things like that. So these revolutions really terrified a lot of people, as did things like the bombs. And so that was a thing happening in the late teens and into the 1920s with this concern over communists and whether and how to proceed with their with the attacks that were happening. A lot of people are going to be deported, kicked out of the United States for not agreeing with these deportations. One of the most famous people who was deported was this very vocal, outspoken woman named Emma Goldman, so one of a couple of hundred people who was kicked out of the United States in this big scare that occurred. At least, let's see, there's somewhere an interview of her, maybe I can post that later. But in general, just a time of great paranoia with, again, some understanding of why that paranoia was happening.